Good evening. My name is Carlin Aguilera Fort, and I serve as the Senior Associate Superintendent of Schools. Welcome to our town hall. We're really glad you can join us for this important conversation. If you need interpretation services, please call the number on your screen. We will begin in a few minutes. Hello, everyone. For those of you just joining us, you can access interpretation services by calling the numbers on your screen. You can also go to sfusd.edu/townhall to access the phone numbers for interpretation services anytime. While we are virtual, we still want to be able to address questions our community has. We have a question form and have already started receiving many questions. We will not be able to get to all of them tonight, but they will inform what we communicate to you. Please be sure to visit the frequently asked questions page on our website at sfusd.edu/RAI. Now, I would like to introduce you to our leader, our superintendent, Dr. Matt Wayne. Dr. Wayne.
Thank you, Dr. Aguilera Fort. Hello, everyone. I'm your superintendent, Dr. Matt Wayne. And tonight we wanted to have a frank conversation about the budget crisis we face as a district, as well as how it relates to our closures and mergers. While we are talking about our budget tonight, it always comes back to our students. We provide such amazing opportunities for our students here in San Francisco Unified. Just the other day, I was at Rosa Parks for their Undokai Day. This is a Japanese field day with activities for the mind, body, and soul. And these are the kind of experiences you can only have when you're part of San Francisco Unified. Rosa Parks has a Japanese bilingual bicultural program. It's right next to Japantown. And on that day, we had the general counsel from Japan at the event. Countless parent volunteers organized it. And these are the type of school communities we have in San Francisco Unified. However, to keep offering these opportunities to our students, we need to make some difficult decisions. And I understand these decisions will have an impact on our school communities. As we have shared our initial thinking about how to best move forward, I know it's made for a challenging few days here in the district. We're all feeling many emotions. So I want to honor that and just allow us to take a collective deep breath. Today, we're going to present a clear picture of our fiscal crisis and why it must be addressed immediately to maintain local control. We will then share the impact of addressing our fiscal crisis on our smallest schools and how we identified 13 schools that meet the criteria for closure or mergers. I'll also share what you may expect from us between now and December. And we're interested to hear from you during this town hall. We've already received a lot of questions from the community, so I'm going to do a Q&A with Dr. Aguilera-Fort. Now, as I stated, we're in a budget crisis. Our last budget report was certified negative, and the state escalated its oversight. Without taking action, we risk a state takeover. It is critical that we maintain the ability to make decisions about our schools and our district, and as your superintendent, I cannot allow there to be a state takeover. We need to make severe reductions and balance the budget. Otherwise, we will not maintain local control. And let me be clear, these reductions are going to impact all of our schools, but they're definitely going to impact our under-enrolled schools, who are most vulnerable to the results of reductions we need to make. So to explain more how we got here and what it means, I'd like to introduce Associate Superintendent of Business Services, Dr. Michelle Huntoon.
Good evening. Good evening, staff, students, parents, and community. Thank you, Dr. Wayne. My name is Michelle Huntoon. I serve as the Associate Superintendent of Business. I began work here in San Francisco Unified on July 1st, so I'm new to the district. And I'm honored to be here supporting our students, staff, and community. So as we look at, let's look back at the 1999-2000 year. We have declined in enrollment from 60,000 students in that year to less than 50,000 students in our current year. And you can see that in the graph as the red line depicts, going from left to right. So the decline has been coming and occurring for more than 20 years, and that pattern of decline is expected to continue into the future. The result of declining enrollment means that the district has less money coming in every year. School districts receive funds based on how many students attend their schools. The district receives the majority of its funding based on enrollment and attendance. Due to declining enrollment, we anticipate receiving less money over the next several years. This is illustrated by the blue bars on the right side of the chart. The red line represents our spending, which will continue to grow as costs increase over time. We are currently expecting to spend more money than we will receive. We must reduce our spending in order to balance our budget and ensure that our finances are sustainable to support the programs that we have established for our students. We were required to adopt a fiscal stabilization plan by the California Department of Education. Otherwise, we risk a state takeover. By adopting a fiscal stabilization plan for the 25-26 year, we will take the steps necessary to align the amount we spend with the amount we receive. It equates to 113 million of reductions in 25-26 and 13 million of reductions in 26-27. We have begun to reduce positions in the current year in the central office. As part of our fiscal stabilization plan, 200 of the 535 positions do reside within the central office. We are also looking at reducing contracts, fewer assistant principals, and fewer counselors. Okay, something's happening. Our goal is to keep the cuts away from the schools as much as possible. We've already reduced the expenditures due to the hiring freeze, but most of our spending does happen at the school level. So even with those deep cuts to central office, it's necessary to reduce expenditures at the site level. Our current reality is not what we would want for any of us. Believe me when I say it is better for us to make these difficult decisions and changes on our own terms rather than through a state takeover. I have personally assisted other districts that have gone through a state takeover. It is not to be taken lightly. It is much better to be active participants than having it done to us. The next couple of years will be rough, but having the ability to determine our own sustainable path is best. And as a parent, I do understand the frustration. Now, I will turn it over to Dr. Wayne.
Thank you, Dr. Huntoon. When we think of our new reality of fewer resources next year, I've become particularly concerned about our schools with low enrollment. Let's take a look at an example of one of our under-enrolled schools. So right now, this is one of our schools. It has 125 students, and it has more staff there than we can afford based on our fiscal reality. Now, this is a big budget for a school with only 125 students and one class per grade level. So next year, here's what the school will look like based on the budget projections that Dr. Huntoon shared. You see that there will be one fewer teacher, which means the school will have a combination class. The school will also not have a nurse on site. They will just come to the site as needed. And the library will be only staffed once a week. As I said, the challenge is that all of our school will face reductions, but at our smaller schools, you can really see the impact. Now, if you look at another under-enrolled school, that has some more students, but still facing significant cuts. However, if these two schools merged, the students could retain some reasonable level of service and support. So as the educational leader of the district, when I see what the future holds for our under-enrolled schools, I feel it's a moral imperative to take action. It would be educational malpractice not to do something to improve the situation for these students. So one step we can take to better support our students is to close or merge some of our schools. And I want to look at how we identified those schools to close that meet the criteria for closure or merger. As I shared, we're looking at our under-enrolled schools. We're also looking at each school's composite score and identified the ones in the lowest 50%. So let me explain this criteria in a little bit more detail. So when we talk about a school with low enrollment or that's under-enrolled, at the TK8 and elementary level, we're talking about schools that have fewer than 260 students. Okay, and why is this number of 260 so important? Well, when there are 260 students, it means there are 2 fully enrolled classes per grade level, with room for an additional transitional kindergarten class or 2 special education classes. It means the teachers who provide the enrichment opportunities only need to teach at 1 or 2 schools rather than going to multiple schools. It means staff who support teachers and students also only need to be at 1 or 2 schools rather than going all across the city to provide their services. Now, at the high school level, we want to have some small high schools. But to have a small high school that still can ensure that our students are graduating college and career ready, we should have at least 400 students. This makes sure that they have access to all the A to G requirements needed to apply to university or college, that they can take AP courses, be a part of career pathways, or take electives, and that they have college counseling and wellness centers, and that they have opportunities to participate in extracurricular activities. So these are the schools that we were looking at where, again, we're really concerned about the impact of the budget reductions. The other criteria is our composite score. So last spring, we went through a process to create a composite score for each school based on community input. And we wanted to determine this score to reflect the values we have as a community. So we identified 10 criteria and organized them into 3 categories: equity, excellence, and effective use of resources. And then we weighted each category. And working with our district advisory committee, we decided to weight the equity category at 50%, while the other 2 categories are at 25%. And this weighting is really important because if we just focus solely on enrollment when deciding how to proceed, then we would really only have 3 of our 4 schools that are in the Bayview, one of our most historically underserved communities, would meet the criteria for closure or merger. But by taking into consideration the composite score, only 1 of the schools meets our criteria. And we really have intentionally planned for equity throughout this whole process. In the past, when we closed schools and when other districts close schools, they often just look at low achievement and low enrollment. This meant that in San Francisco 20 years ago, while only about 10% of the students in the district were African American, 30% of them came from schools that were closed. So I put in safeguards into the process to make sure we're keeping in mind educational equity and not disproportionately impacting any one community, and making sure that if there are any impacts, we can mitigate the harm. And so we're doing that through community engagement, through the use of our composite scores. There's also this Assembly Bill 1912, which, although we're not required to follow it, we are following it to make sure that equity considerations are taken into account. And then when we prepare our final recommendation, we're going to do an equity audit. And it will be a third-party audit that will give us feedback to make sure that we're holding true to our values. So, based on that criteria, we had shared this week that these are the schools that meet the criteria for closure or merger. Now, I know that's really difficult to hear. I've been to all of our schools in the district, and they all are unique and special communities. But it's important that if we're talking about these schools, that we hear directly from them. So starting next week, I'll be out at those schools talking directly with the communities to hear from them, hear about their hopes and concerns, to share more specific information about our budget crisis and what this means for their school, and identify the unique needs of each school community to help inform any recommendations we make. And if you have any questions about our resource alignment initiative, you can go to our website. It also has tips for how to talk with students about any potential closures or mergers. But we know when we're sharing something like this, we want to do it with care and empathy and help our students understand the decisions that are necessary to make sure they get what they need as they go through San Francisco Unified. Now, when we're talking about addressing our budget crisis, this is only one component of it. We're going to bring recommendations for this on November 12th to the Board of Education, and then they will take action on December 10th. That prepares us then for us to submit our first interim budget report and to the state and really demonstrate the steps we are making to retain local control. So we wanted you to be clear about how we're doing, what we're doing over the next month and a half to address our budget crisis and to support our most low-enrolled schools that are the most vulnerable impacts to the impact of reductions, and then to bring recommendations to the board so they can take action to make sure that we are fiscally stable and that we maintain local control. So thank you for letting me share. As I said, I know we've received a lot of questions already. I'm sure Dr. Aguilera-Fort has seen more as we have gone through this presentation. So I'm going to turn it over to him to start sharing some of the questions from the community so we can respond.
Thank you, Dr. Wayne. And as you can imagine, our families have sent several questions to us. We will not be able to take all of them today, but I want to bring to you some of the biggest ones and some of the patterns that we have collected as of right now. So let's dive in. A community member writes that they have heard that closing schools doesn't save any money and might even cost money. Why close schools if it is not going to save any money to the district?
No, I appreciate this question, and this is something we do need to be more clear about, right? Closing schools does save the district money. There are some upfront costs that we've already accounted for, but in the long term, there are ongoing costs that we will no longer have to incur when a school is operating. So part of what is expected when we present our recommendations is we'll present a detailed fiscal analysis to the Board of Education on November 12th. But I do want to be clear that the savings will only represent a small part of the overall reductions we need to make. But again, it's not really just about the cost saving. It's more importantly, how we're using our resources more effectively to better serve our students. You know, the more schools we have, the more our resources are stretched thin. And then the less revenue we have, the less we are able to hire staff and provide all these supports and services. So we are really thinking, again, how do we align our resources to enrollment to make sure that we're using them well? So it will save us some money, but it's part of a broader approach to fiscal stabilization.
This next question has been shared during the board meetings and has been shared during other public comments. Why doesn't the district cut from central office and protect the schools?
Yeah, we have heard that one a lot. And, you know, I appreciate the question. I'm here at the central office, but for a long time, I was a classroom teacher, an assistant principal, and a principal. And, you know, it's really what happens at the school site is what matters. So for me, it's been important that as we work towards fiscal stabilization, we have tried to minimize the impact of schools, and we've looked first at the district office. So a few years ago, the district worked with the budget legislative analyst office from the city of San Francisco, and they did an analysis of how much we spend on our central office and also compared to other districts around the state that are of similar size. They found that we spent 28% of our general fund on the central office, whereas the average from the other district was under 20%. And that report was from right before I started, and since then, we've been reducing the central office. Last year, it only accounted for 22% of district expenditures, and this year, it's going to be 20% of expenditures. And as we make reductions for 25, 26, we are going to continue to have to scale back the district office. And so you saw Dr. Huntoon, right? She shared that we're going to have over 500 positions that are going to be reduced. Well, over a third of them right now are identified from the central office. And, you know, but again, the central office only accounts for 20% of the district's general fund expenditures. So we are, going to continue to look there first. But the reality is most of our expenditures are at the school sites, right? Most of our, 80% of our budget is at the school site. So when we see this level of, declining enrollment and our, expenditures increasing, we also have to take action to make reductions at the school site. And that's really tough because, again, it's what happens there that matters. It's not what happens here. It's we're here for our students in the classroom and our staff that's supporting them.
The following question has been repeatedly stated, and during this round, it came a lot several times. San Francisco has a strong tradition of having small learning communities. Why are you targeting small schools?
Yeah, small schools are really an important part of the district. And it's something that, at least while I'm superintendent, we are always going to have small schools in San Francisco. When I started as a teacher, I was a middle school language arts teacher actually at a K-8 school that was one of the smaller schools. And it was a great opportunity to get to know my students and really develop a relationship with them over, over the years, okay? But there's small schools, then there's schools that are really low enrolled. And that's why we're saying that number of 260 is so important. Because if a school has 260 students, it's an elementary school, it's still really small, but they can have that 2 classes per grade level that I mentioned. Like, that's so important for the kids to be able to be with each other during their time at elementary school, and for teachers to collaborate with their colleagues. I know, like I said, I was at a small school, but we had 2 classes per grade level. And particularly my first year of teaching, I would not have survived if I didn't have my colleague, my other middle school colleague who taught language arts there with the other class to support me. And so, we have 21 schools right now that have fewer than 260 students. So even if we move forward with this plan, we'll still have many small schools as an option for our families. And here's the other thing about San Francisco, why in some ways it's always going to be an option, is that we're a unique district with our unique geography. So in many districts, schools are built and it's kind of one size fits all. But in San Francisco, we have school buildings that can only hold 300 students. And so we're going to always have small schools as our portfolio. But as I said, and what I shared is, I'm really concerned about the impact of reductions on these schools. And that's why it's important to have a conversation with them about what that looks like. And it's why they met the criteria for having that conversation and for closure or merger.
Thank you. Along the same lines, our schools could have had more students, but the district wouldn't enroll them. Why should we have to close schools for being under-enrolled when the district could have sent more students to school?
Since I've started here, I've heard how challenging our enrollment system is. Right now, families have to choose from, they're enrolling their kindergartner from, 72 elementary and K-8 schools. And, and it's a challenging process. And we hear how families get sent to, sometimes get assigned to schools that they don't want, that aren't near them, that they're not interested in sending their kids. And this is happening for 2 reasons. One, we need to reform our student assignment system. And actually the board passed a policy to start having more neighborhood-driven enrollment practices so students can go to school near where they live, and it's more predictable about what will happen when you try to enroll in our school district. So we're planning to move towards that. And in the spring, we're going to have discussions about what that looks like, as well as where our language programs, any changes we need to make to our language programs. And that's an important conversation to have. But even with changing that, here's what we're facing. As Dr. Huntoon said, we have really like 12,000 fewer students than we had 20 years ago, and basically the same number of schools. So it means if we want to keep a school open, we have to send those students out to all of those schools, which is going to mean that we have under-enrolled schools. So that's why it's not that we're trying to have a school that has low enrollment. But if we don't send students to school and we can't keep them open, then, I mean, in reality, that would mean closing schools. And so we want to do it in a thoughtful way, but we're not trying to, stop people from going to schools. It's just right now with our enrollment system, it's what we need to do to maintain 102 schools. So that's why it's just so important. We really start aligning the number of schools we have to our enrollment.
Along the lines of what San Francisco is and what San Francisco Unified School District represents, we got this one. My child's school has a unique program that is very special to them. I do not want them to lose access to this program. What assurances can you provide about this?
This is exactly why we want to talk to each school community that meets the criteria for closure or merger. If there's something special about your child's school, we want to do what we can to make sure they still have access to that. When we're thinking about the future for your kids, we want to, like I said, we want to take advantage of what's special in all of our school communities to make sure students can benefit from that. And, that's why it's so important. We're out there next week talking with their families, hearing from them. You heard me talk about the Japanese bilingual bicultural program at Rosa Parks. These are the kind of unique opportunities that we provide our students. And each one of our schools has something like that. But what's great about our school communities is they're always also bringing in new opportunities for our students. So, we're really going to make sure as we move forward with this budget, addressing this budget crisis and, reducing, expenditures across all of our schools, that we're still keeping in mind what makes San Francisco Unified special and how do we ensure those programs are supported even if we have fewer resources.
Thank you. The following question is actually pertinent as well with the current reality. Many schools are lacking promised foundational staffing, such as full-time social worker, not from an inability to hire them, but due to the lack of budget and or because of the hiring freeze. How can families be certain that the schools that remain after the fiscal stabilization plan and realignment will be fully staffed with credentialed teachers, social workers, family liaisons, and special education teachers?
Yeah, so San Francisco is facing, like many districts, a teacher shortage and a staffing crisis. And then, frankly, we've made it harder on ourselves with the lack of a good, financial, human resources, and payroll system. And so this has been a real struggle for the last couple of years since I've been here. And so first, we are taking action to improve our systems. We, frankly, we had adopted a system several years ago that has been a disaster, right? And so we decided we needed to invest in a system that's going to work for us, and really that works, is a proven system in K-12 schools. So we are adopting a new system that is used in a majority of California districts, and that we think will really help us with these operational challenges we face when trying to deal with budget and staffing and human resources. And we're already seeing that. I was, a colleague was sharing, we have a new substitute management system and just how much easier it is and straightforward. And that's helped us have more classes covered by substitutes. The other thing is, this keeps, you're going to hear me, I guess, whenever we have these questions, you're going to hear me say this a lot. We're spreading our resources too thin. So that's the other challenge, is that when we have so many schools, which results in needing, staff at all of these schools, you saw that example of how, we have a small school that has a lot of staff. It means that in an environment of a teacher shortage, we're not able to then be able to be able to get everybody in that we need in the classroom. So we're really working to make sure that next year we will be fully staffed from day one, and we'll have addressed these fiscal and operational issues. And having, fewer schools is one strategy to help with that. But you heard there's other things we're doing to address this issue.
Now let's move into the experience of the students. And they have a particular need and particular interest as members of a school community. This is the voice of the student. It is hard for me to meet new people. What's going to happen to me in my new school?
I love that students are reaching out and sharing their questions or concerns, because again, that we're here for the students, right? And and this is and we've heard this week. What's so great about San Francisco Unified is students and staff and families love their school community, and I've been to every one of our schools, and they are such welcoming places. So I feel confident telling any student, if they need to go through a transition, they're going to find a school that is welcoming and have classmates who they'll be able to connect with and make friends with. But we're not going to just let that happen by chance. If we need to have any school communities come together, we have a lot of thoughts about how we can support any transitions for our kids, make sure they get to meet other students before the school starts, make sure that they actually get to stay with friends. This is one of the reasons why a merger, we think, would be a plan that makes sense, because we could keep friends with friends and they could stay together and then meet new friends in their new community. And so, this is also what we want to talk to our schools about, is if you're going through a transition, how can we support you? What do you need to know that if two school communities are coming together, that it can actually become one and, provide everything that our students need? Because really what we want to feel is that when a student, if they have to go to a new school, or when a student, joins our district, that really that school feels like home for them. And knowing how our schools are like, I'm sure we can do that anytime a new student joins San Francisco Unified or has to join a new school.
As the students move from one location to the other, they are building this new community in this new space. What will happen to the school buildings when they are no longer the schools that they used to be?
So I know we're still just at the beginning stages of this process and talking to schools, just even what, about their future and what the plan is. I will say, though, we understand how valuable real estate is in San Francisco. And first, we do not intend to sell any of our current properties. We want to use them for community benefit. We already shared some ideas, like we do have a need in certain parts of the district for more space for transitional kindergarten, our preschool, our early education. We also, we have a current bond program. We, are hoping to have a future bond program. And as I mentioned, we have small schools, so small school buildings, so it can be hard to renovate and upgrade a school while leaving the school there. So having another building that the students can go to during modernization is important. And also, we have some of our own programs. Like, we are also a county office of education. We have some county programs we need to provide. Right now, we're leasing space for that. We can then use our own space for that. And we know there's community-based organizations with whom we partner that may have interest. And all of this can help generate revenue for the district. And no matter what, though, we do not want schools just sitting, vacant in our communities. We have a shared schoolyard program right now that, like, when it's summer or during the breaks, where the schoolyards are open to our community. If we have any schools, if we have any buildings that are not being used as schools, we're going to start that program right away. So I also want to say something really important, because I don't know if this has come up in the FAQs, but it's a question I've heard. Come up in the questions that people submitted so far, but it's a question that I've heard a lot. Is this really an opportunity to have charter schools come into the district? I want to be crystal clear about that. We have no plans to have any new charter schools in San Francisco Unified School District. In fact, we signed on to support a new legislation that makes it harder for, that says a district doesn't even need to consider any new charter schools if they have closed any schools within the past 5 years. And so that is not what we're trying to do here. And I really want to assure our community that this is about serving our students well. And as we address this budget crisis, if we have opportunities to use some of our schools to bring in revenue, to minimize the impact on our students and our schools, that's what we want to do. And use them for community benefit, not use them to invite other non-SFUSD educational institutions into this, into our district.
Thank you. We spoke about the experience of the students. We look at the buildings. Now let's talk about our own staff, our own peers, our people. How will the budget cuts impact staff in general, and also at the schools that may close, across the district and at those schools that may close? How will these impact?
Yeah, it's going to have an impact. I mean, when we're talking about over 300 school site positions that need to be reduced, we're going to see that at our schools. But we're going to do everything we can to retain our valued staff that we currently have. We do see a lot of attrition each year, and we want to make sure that we're creating a stable environment where our staff can stay and won't leave the district. And so we're really going to work to keep them. We're looking at an early retirement program to realize savings as well. And so we're going to do everything we can to keep all of our staff. And if there is a staff member at a school that closes or merges with another school, we're going to work with our labor partners to identify next steps for them. But again, with the goal of keeping our staff. Because I'm out in our schools, I see how hard our staff work. And if they're in San Francisco Unified, that means they care about our kids. They want to be here. And so we want to keep them here.
Thank you. Now let's move again into finances and budget. Some people
actually, I'm going to share one more thought too about that, just because I know there's been a question about what's the difference between a closure and a merger. And when we're talking about it, we're talking about the difference of what happens to the students. For the students, it means if we're saying they're merging, all the students are going over to the school. For the staff, as I said, we need to work with our labor partners on what's the process for the staff, but our intent is to make sure we're retaining staff. And then a closure, when we're saying a school close, it just means that saying the students are going to more than one site and not merging into another site. So that's the distinction between the two. Okay, I think you already said we got some more questions about budget and our revenue, right?
Yes, and so, but here is the question. Why can't you get more money from the state or apply for more grants?
We're fortunate to be in San Francisco, where our community has already committed a lot of local funding. So when I talk about those arts, libraries, music programs, while at our smaller school there may be an impact, we're able to provide those because of funding that the city of San Francisco gives. And so we will always be providing those. But again, we want to do it well and not spread our resources so thin. We also get a lot of grants, but here's the challenge. Those grants, they are usually can only be used for particular things and often one-time funds. And while we get a lot of local funding compared to other districts, the majority of our funds come from the state. And when the majority of our funds come from the state, they only fund us through one factor, and that's enrollment, right? And actually, we do get some additional money based on our student population, but it's still the enrollment of our kids, as well as the different the different demographics of our students. But it all comes down to enrollment. And so when we talk about wanting to get more revenue, we really need to be talking to the state about how they're funding education. While they have increased funding per student in California, we're still not like some of our states that have, like New York, that, Massachusetts, that have large urban districts that are really, well funded. So again, we'd love to get more revenue. We'll continue to apply for grants. When we're talking about addressing our budget crisis and needing to make reductions, it's because the ongoing funds we receive just aren't enough to continue doing what we've been doing.
The next question is a very interesting one, and it has come in different ways, even at board meetings. And it's a concern from people in the community, from the voters, and to all of us. Here's the question, Dr. Wayne. How do you expect voters to approve a facilities bond when you are closing schools?
Yeah, well, as you heard, we have a lot of schools and a lot of facilities. And so right now we have a $790 million bond on the November 5th ballot. It's called Proposition A. And this would allow us to continue our current bond program without raising taxes. And so even with fewer schools, we still have so many needs at our facilities. And the reality is the state does not provide funding for schools to be maintained. That's why San Francisco and most other districts end up needing to do these bonds. The state once in a while does do a facility bond, but it's never enough to address the needs. And with so many schools, it's kind of like, how we have to think about it, like how we do the Golden Gate Bridge here in San Francisco, right? The Golden Gate Bridge always needs to be painted. You go, you start on one side, and by the time you get to the other, you got to go back. And it's the same thing with the number of facilities we have. We need an ongoing bond program because we'll be upgrading buildings. And, after 20, 30 years, the ones that we did from Proposition A are going to need still maintenance, and so we'll need to continue with bond programs. And so really our students need and deserve clean, safe, modern facilities. And if we can do it in a way that doesn't increase taxes, we think that's it was important to put that question to the voters.
Thank you. You did explain a little bit of these at the very beginning of your presentation. It's about the composite scores. Composite scores seems a little bit complicated. Why is the district using it as part of its criteria to select schools?
Yeah, it is a little complicated, but when we're talking about keeping equity at the center, that's a complex issue, right? And we wanted to make sure that we did that from the beginning of this process. So we're one of the few districts, maybe the only district so far, that before even establishing our criteria to consider, we named equity as an important value. And when you think about what other districts have done and what I said in the past, it's usually based on enrollment, facilities, test scores, and staffing. And if we just followed that, it would have been a very different list that we would have looked at of schools that meet the criteria for mergers or closures, right? And so it was really important that we have some way, and that's what the composite score is, to bring in equity as well as other values that we considered to help us make decisions. And I appreciate the district advisory committee. These were 11 volunteers who spent a lot of time, of their own time, looking at our district, looking at all these issues. And they really said, we need to make sure that this is a consideration when you are establishing your, what you're thinking of doing around closures or mergers. And really, it needs to be a consideration as we make the budget reductions we need to make to address our budget crisis. And again, it could be simple if we use the traditional measures, but we wanted to do something that, was, well, maybe a little bit more complex, really reflected what we care about as a district.
Thank you, Dr. Wayne. We do have several more questions, but we are going to close at least this part with the next questions, and we'll continue receiving more. But this is the last one for now. There is a lot of new development in the city. Won't the district enrollment increase, and doesn't that mean more revenue for the district?
Yeah, you know, it's exciting when we hear about new developments in San Francisco, but we, you know, when we present our enrollment projections to the state, it's expected that it's grounded in data that we get from a demographer. So we have had demographic studies, and we have a recent study, it can be found on our website, you know, that shows that still we're facing declining enrollment. And what it also shows, like maybe to get a little wonky here, is that in San Francisco, even when there's new developments, they don't always yield the same number of kids as maybe in other cities. Like in other cities, you know, a lot of them are single family homes that get developed, and, you know, families move into them and it goes to schools. Here, you know, San Francisco is the city, you know, one of the cities, or maybe the city with the least amount of school-aged youth in the city. So the new developments are still not going to bring as many families and students. Now, so first of all, in terms of revenue, we can't count on then, you know, hope that more students will come. We really need to send in those projections based on our current enrollment and what the demographer is showing in the future. Now, if our enrollment does change, that would be great. We would have more revenue. We have plenty of space in our schools. Even if we, you know, take action to close our merged schools, we will still have more space in our schools. So we are trying to think about the future. And again, we hope that new development in the long run might bring a lot more students. But when we're talking about addressing our budget crisis, we're not going to be able to, we're not going to be able to count on new, you know, increased enrollment and more revenue from the state.
Thank you, Dr. Wayne. Well, that concludes this part of the process for today. And I want to thank you for being open to responding these questions and for providing our community with a sense of clarity in terms of the direction we are heading. With that, Dr. Wayne, I will pass it on back to you so you can close this event of today. Thank you, Dr. Wayne.
Thank you, Dr. Aguilera Fort. And I appreciated both being able to talk to you as well as you representing and, you know, picking up the questions that are coming in to help us respond. But still, when we talk about engaging the community, you know, it is difficult in this virtual environment. So I want to say again, I'm excited to go out to the community. I know they're going to be tough conversations, but I'm going to hear directly from parents and staff and students who want the best for our children and know that we're all here to figure out, how do we solve this budget crisis together? How do we address these challenging issues together so that we can provide the best opportunities for our students? And I know that, again, being San Francisco, we're going to have, you know, thoughtful, intense conversations, and we're going to come up with a path forward that will really bring a brighter future for our district. You know, it's been a challenging few years, and we need stability. And so we need to go through this change in order to get to stability. I also want to say tonight, like, I know there's a lot of information coming out. We're doing our best to be, you know, clear and transparent. But you heard there's questions about what seems confusing or why do this, why do that. So I do encourage people to go to our website. We have a lot of information there. We have more FAQs. So we've started an FAQ already that you can look at. And I think it's hundreds, right? We've gotten of questions tonight. I don't know. We'll find out by the end if it's in the thousands, but we're going to look over those to make sure we're responding to the questions that that are out there. And you know, I want to end saying, you know, this evening focused on our budget crisis. I shared we're going to do more conversations about that. And, you know, this is something that has felt, you know, really important to be more, you know, clear and share more widely what we're facing. You know, when the state came in at the end of the school year, you know, they came in and they gave us the negative certification in May. They escalated the oversight, you know, that started in mid-May, June. We submitted that fiscal stabilization plan that identifies the over 500 fewer positions, really not till the end of June. So that was after school was out. and people weren't here. And so we needed to get back to this and share, what our current reality is. And then again, we are needing to make tough decisions. And part of the way to address that reality is to look at closures and mergers. And so I want to end, while this was about the budget, saying what I said at the beginning, that ultimately this is about our students. And, as the educational leader, because I'm a teacher at heart, and I tell you, as a school principal, it's really about what can we do as a district, as a system, to make sure what's happening in the classroom is working for our students. That's where they're learning. That's where they have relationships. That's where, they get connected to their classmates, to their teachers, to the student nutrition service person. We had custodial appreciation week. That's where it matters. So, even though we're having these big budget conversations, it's thinking about how do we, have these discussions and focus on making the right decisions so that our kids get what they need to be successful. And ultimately, so we can meet our goals that we established for our students around 3rd grade literacy, 8th grade math, and college and career readiness. So again, I appreciate the opportunity to share about that. I'm looking forward to seeing people in person, and have a good Thursday evening, and keep sending in your questions and comments, and we'll keep reviewing them. Thank you.